Hey there, folks. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about fonts and SDL. So, as you can see in the corner here, it's about time that we can print out some text. We're going to be using something known as a TrueType font. TrueType fonts have been around for a long time, and they give us pixel-level control over the fonts that we create. So, this means that artists can be very creative in the types of fonts that you display. Calligraphy, after all, is an art. So what you're going to need for this lesson is some free fonts here. A quick Google search can find 1,001 free fonts here, and you'll be able to have a little bit of fun with this lesson and pick your favorite. I'm going to pick LCD and then do maybe a bit font here. You can download it, and these should be free fonts here, and I'll provide one in the repository as well. But let's go ahead and get into the SDL tools to display fonts. What we're going to need is what's known as the SDL TTF library, for SDL version 2. And you can go ahead and download this library depending on if you're on Mac, Windows, or I'm going to show you how to do it on Linux, which already has the libraries built for you. So, of course, you can build these from source, but I'm going to show you in Linux. And if you need help, please feel free to comment below or reach out, and I can add more videos for your particular platform. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to the code. So, how do I go about getting the SDL TTF library? Well, I can search for it. And usually I can search with some sort of keywords here. Let's go ahead and pretend I didn't know as much about the libraries here. And I can find all the different SDL libraries here, which we may eventually build. But I do know that this one is libsdl2-ttf from the website, and I can find it here. And usually what I want is the developer libraries, especially when I'm doing development, because this means I get the libraries that I can link in when I'm compiling my code. Okay, so let's go ahead and install that with sudo apt-get install libsdl2-ttf-dev. Again, it's important that we develop with the developer libraries. Go ahead and hit enter, and I've already got it installed, but you might be asked to accept this download and just hit yes. Again, if you're downloading from source for Windows and Mac users, go ahead and just build the project, and we can continue from there. Okay, now that I've got the library, let me go ahead and open up our example source file for this lesson and walk you through the code about how to use our library. So it's going to look relatively familiar. What we need to do is include the SDL2 TTF library here as such. And again, if you're a Mac user, you might have a different path. It might just be the SDL_TTF.h library. That's okay. And again, this library is going to mirror the other libraries that we've used. In fact, it's just a flat C API. So it's C-based, just like the SDL2 library. And in fact, before I get into the commands, let me show you how to get a little bit more help from the documentation. So from the website, if you Google SDL2 TTF, you'll find the documentation available on the site. I like using the one-page view so I can search around quickly, and you'll get some ideas about, again, how to build it, and if you're building this from source from one of the other platforms. So the basic idea is to include our TTF library, link in the library, although this may not work for Linux. I'll get to that in a moment. It's actually SDL2 on my system. But the general ideas here are that we need to initialize the system and clean it up whenever we're finished. This is mimicking the same things that we've done on SDL. In fact, if we go ahead and look at this side by side for a moment, with SDL, we initialize our system here. Oops, let me just scroll up a little bit here. Here's where we do the initialization. And at the bottom of our code, we do the SDL quit here. I move over to the side for a moment. We're going to follow the same thing. And again, this is sort of a very C way of programming where you have to initialize all your memory up front and you reclaim it at the end. So that's the same idea with SDL libraries like TTF. Okay, so once we've initialized things, we can also return any errors if there were any error messages. And then eventually we want to get to the important part, which is opening our font. Now, the key idea, I'm going to show you in the source code in a moment, is that we're going to open up the font. And remember, the advantage of TrueType fonts is that they're pixel-based. So this essentially means we're going to take the font and then load it onto a surface. Because remember, in SDL, a surface is our way to load pixel data onto an internal image format in SDL. And then what we can do is take that pixel data and render it to a texture. So it'll be really, really fast. So this is a way for us to render our text onto a texture and do text rendering very quickly. Now, if you need to make changes and these kind of things on the fly, you'll have to sort of recreate these surfaces and think a little bit about how to optimize it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just go ahead and show how to get the text at this moment. So again, I've provided some sample code for this that you can find in the repository as always. Let's walk through it together just so we understand the different parts. So I've got how to compile here, and we need to include our library. Most of this code here is, again, setting up the SDL window, which we've done before, and finally to the new parts, starting here. And you'll notice that I'm initializing the TTF library here, as shown, and just checking that this subsystem does in fact initialize. Reasons why it might fail may be because, again, you haven't loaded the library or whatever. And you can query that error code here. Maybe your system doesn't support something or a dependency. Once that's been set up, you can then open your font. And again, from our fonts file, this is going to be the font that we've downloaded. Any .ttf file should work. And then it'll be stored here. Now, for some reason it can't be loaded, then you may also want to catch that error and maybe terminate your program. So I've included a little bit of error handling here. Now, again, here's the key part with TTFs, because again, remember they're a pixel-based format. TTF underscore render text, solid, and what our font is, the text that we're rendering, Mike SDL2 series, and then the color, which I've just included here as a tuple of 3 values, the red, green, and blue components. So to make this white text. Okay, now, just like everything else that we've done in SDL previously, if you've been following on this series, we can also take a surface and create a texture from it for our render, as is done here. So that's really all there is to it. And then since we're done with the pixel data, since it's all on a texture, then we can free that surface. And I'm also going to create a rectangle to draw our text on. Now, let me go ahead and scroll down here. And you'll notice there's nothing specific here to drawing the text, because remember, the text is on a texture. So I'm just going to render our texture here onto our rectangle, which, if you missed it above, is a rectangle positioned at 10 by 10 in the X and the Y coordinates, and it's 400 by 100. Okay. And then once we're out of our main loop, so if the user exits, then we'll destroy our texture appropriately, destroy the window, and close down our font subsystem, the TTF or TrueType font system that we're learning about today. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a try. Let's go ahead and try to compile this. And let me try to compile this the way that we previously were, if you've been following along on other lessons. And again, if you find yourself with an error like this, undefined references, well, remember we're including a new library here, the SDL2 TTF library. So let's just modify that and link in SDL2 underscore TTF, enter, and we should have our library here. And now we have our program, and I can run this, and I'll bring the window down below, and we'll see that we have our text here. So it's as simple as that, and this allows us to render text relatively simple. Now at this point, you might have noticed that there are many steps involved in rendering, such as creating a surface, then rendering a texture, and there may be additional things that we might want to handle, such as, well, what happens if we want to change this text? We would essentially have to recreate that texture on the fly. Or what happens if we have multiple lines here? Well, we might want to be able to handle line breaks by essentially creating another surface just below it and sort of figure out what the width and the height is. So building a text system isn't always trivial. There may be some abstraction that you have to provide. But as far as just getting text on the screen, this will serve the purpose just as well. And I hope this has been helpful and that you now know about a new library and how to solve a new problem with SDL2 on how to render text. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.